Hey, this is Darren from Property Prosperity. Today I thought I'd have a bit of a chat to you about a meeting I had today with a civil engineer. I don't know if anyone knows what a civil engineer is, but basically they design all what's called civil works. So civil works are things like roads and sewer connections and water connections and stormwater and electricity and a whole pile of different things associated with doing a development. So we're actually having a chat about how complicated things become when you're actually doing a larger development. So, for a lot of my clients, I'm helping out with smaller scale developments where we're sort of, they've got an old house on just an average size, quarter acre block, which is sort of 700-800 square meters, and you knock the house down, you subdivide into two, or it might be a 900 square meter block, so you might be able to subdivide into three, or, so smaller scale developments, they're relatively simple because you've got access. Generally, you have access to a road, and so you'll be able to leverage off the existing infrastructure that the council have already provided, and then just reconnect up to that. So basically, if you're going to build two houses, it's just two new pipes coming off the existing sewer connection, or if it's three houses, three new pipes coming in the sewer connection. Even when you're doing one that's sort of three or four or five, you can still almost use just pretty standard sort of plumbing to get from. Not much different from just building a normal house, essentially. What happens when you start going over maybe about four houses? Then you start to have roadways, and then when you start to have a road, you got to try and work out what's how you're going to get the services down that road. And at a certain point, you got to incorporate street lighting, and then you got to think about even little things, like what's going to happen with their bins. Where's the hey Dave, thanks for joining. Is the rubbish man going to have to drive down the road or not? And at a certain point in time, when it gets large enough, 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, houses on the one street that you're building, then it's becoming a public street at the end of the day. And so you start to put all these requirements and all these obligations, and then you start to have a lot more effect on the existing infrastructure of the road. So you actually, of the council. So you start to find things like, are the existing stormwater services, in the street going to be big enough to be able to cope with, 8 extra houses? And is the sewer going to be big enough? And will they have to, electricity-wise, they're going to have to upgrade all the electricity capability because we've got, going from one house to 8 houses. So, and particularly when you start talking larger again, when you're talking, 40 or 50 or 100 or 200 lot subdivision, then you start to put in, whole new infrastructure. You might even have to, some cases where I've been involved in, you might actually have to look at putting in a whole new sewer plant, or maybe people have to, have their own power generation or their whole own, own sewer treatment within their own blocks. So it's something called an aerated sewer tank, like septic tank, that will actually, recycle the poop basically. And so it all gets really complicated when you start getting bigger and bigger. So me personally, I've probably got a preference for smaller scale developments, because then I can go out on site and almost, I'm got to the point now I can get on Google Earth, have a quick look at the house, and I pretty much know what to expect without having to spend too much more time. Obviously before you go and spend any money, you're going to go out and have a good look at it and research all the government departments and put a lot more effort in before you put money into it. But pretty much you have a good idea what's going to happen before you get involved. But when you get into a larger scale development where you're building roads and infrastructure and upgrading all the electricity and water connections, you're starting to deal with working in with government departments. You're going to have a lot of designs for upgrading of all the systems and processes. You've got to incorporate that within SA Water. As far as what the cost for some of those things, it's going to be really vague and it's really unknown, and it might be unknown for quite a long time. Even to engage someone like a civil engineer that might come in and help you design all the the stormwater system or the sewer system or the electricity system, all those different things they're going to have to take into account. Even designing up the road and how it's actually going to be constructed and structured. So all those things are going to be quite detailed and quite technical, and obviously they have to be built to a very high standard. So because they're essentially lasting for many years, tens if not hundreds of years basically. So if you're going to that sort of extent, the technical drawings and the detail you have to go in is quite extensive. So you might find to do a subdivision where you're subdividing into, at the moment I'm doing a subdivision from 1 into 8. So we're having to build a public road and having to deal with all those issues that I'm talking about. At the end of that, we're actually, the reason I call it a public road is because we're going to build it, so it'll be a private road essentially at the start, and then we're going to gift that back to the council. So the council then going to take over ownership of that road. So nowadays what happens is council are quite concerned about having to foot the bill for all these developments. So what they do now is they say, hey, if you want to do a development, you're going to have to cover the costs, and we may or may not take over the responsibility of that road down the track. And if we do, you're going to make sure you build it to a certain standard for us to be able to take over it down the track. So essentially, you're building the road for them, you're building all the services and the infrastructure for them, and you're going to gift it back to the council. So you can imagine the costs associated with building a road and all those services. It goes into hundreds of thousands of dollars, even just to draw up these plans of just trying to work out what's possible and what's not possible, and liaising with all the government departments, which is something what a civil engineer would be involved in doing. Literally it's tens of thousands, $20,000, $30,000. Sometimes with a larger development, when you're doing like you see people doing a subdivision of farmland, might be into 50 or 100 or 200 blocks. Literally they could spend $200,000 on just getting consultants and engineers and all the experts that come and give them advice and draw up plans and negotiating with council and all the different government departments. So you can spend a couple of $100,000 all before you know whether it's going to happen or not. So you can see it's a really expensive process. So you can see why, if you're doing subdivisions from 1 into 2, the numbers are pretty clear, to be honest. You have a really good idea. The government outlined what it's going to cost you as far as government costs. It's pretty clear what it's going to cost you as far as the surveyor costs and the conveyancing costs. Then it comes down to other things which you may not be aware of. Do we need retaining walls, or do we need extra services, or what's it going to cost to build the house, and we've got tree issues or easement issues and all those different things. But someone that's relatively experienced, once you start doing lots and lots of developments, you start to know what those things are, and you can relatively predict what those costs are. They're quite relatively clear to try and work those out. When you get to really large scale developments, it's almost a total guess. And so really what you have to do is spend the money and do the research up front before you start even contemplating doing the big developments. So that's why quite often you'll find for large scale developments, developers don't necessarily want to take a massive punt. So they might actually work in with the owner of the land. They either might do a joint venture where the owner of the land still owns the land, but the developer comes in and they work with it together. Or they might put something called either an option, or they might basically an option to purchase the property in the future, or they might sign a contract with stages of the purchase, essentially, meaning many of those stages might be getting approval from the council to make sure they're mitigating any risk associated. Because obviously if they're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get this approval through, you don't want to find out at the end of it that it gets knocked back and then suddenly you're stuck with a property you've spent millions of dollars to purchase. So that's one of the ways that on the large scale developments they try and mitigate those risks, is to be upfront with the owner up front, saying, hey, we want to buy your property, but we just don't want to take a massive risk. We're willing to spend hey, Ashley, thanks for joining. They're willing to spend the hundreds of thousands of dollars it's going to take to be able to investigate whether we can subdivide. But if we can't, unfortunately, we're not going to go ahead with the subdivision, and that's just the way it's going to work. So, hey, Alex, thanks for joining. And so, yeah, so now you can probably see why how complex it can be involved is doing a really large-scale development. You understand probably why smaller-scale developments can be a lot easier process and a lot simplified process, because the numbers are a lot clearer and the risks are a lot lower. And quite often a lot of developers come a little bit unstuck because they start out doing lots of small-scale developments, 1 into 2 or 3 or 4, and then when they start to do the larger developments into 8 or 10 or 20 or 30, that's when they start to maybe be a bit outside the comfort zone and their area of expertise, and they particularly because you're talking about huge amounts of money, and even just the holding costs, basically the interest charges associated with hold on to a property that's potentially worth millions of dollars can be really expensive, and that can be the difference between being really profitable and going broke. So you can see the risks involved from developers. I know from people's perspective, developers are out there making lots of money and they're all really rich, but they are taking huge risks sometimes to make that happen. So but don't be fearful. If you've got a smaller scale subdivision, 1 into 2, 3 or 4, the risks are quite minimal, to be honest. If someone that's quite experienced has done it very often, then you're going to find you're pretty much in safe hands. You can have a pretty good idea of where you're going to make money right from the very start before you've even gone down the track of spending too much money. So hopefully it made sense, and hopefully you've liked what I had to say. If you've liked what I had to say, then click on the like button. If you haven't liked what I have to say, then still click on the like button, because I really appreciate it. And if you know someone that's contemplating a subdivision, whether that's a small scale subdivision or maybe they're thinking about doing a big development, maybe you want to share this post just in case and give them a little bit more information, make sure they don't make any mistakes that a few other developers make. So Thanks for your time, and if you've got something you'd like to talk about, you've had an experience doing a large-scale development, and maybe it's gone really well, maybe it hasn't gone so well, or even a small-scale development, I'd love to hear about it and put a comment in the comment box, or if you'd like me to chat about something in the future episode, then put a comment in the comment box, and I'm happy to chat about it. Thanks, guys. I look forward to talking again next time. Bye for now.